So, can anybody hear me?
I can hear you very quietly, but now I can actually hear you.
Oh, well, that's possible to be louder. So, how about this?
Yes, that is much better.
Much better.
Okay, and we have David as well. Hi, Wes. Hi, David. Hi, David. Do you have connectivity? No, not yet.
I see Martin also, so as soon as David's online, should be good to go.
This is David. I think I made it. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I can hear my echo, so I must have made it.
One of the usual announcements is we will need a note taker. So if you are a person who might be willing to be the note taker, please let us know, or we will gladly accept your notes. It's not an onerous job, but it is an important job for us to be able to have a record of the meeting, especially in case other things don't turn out the way we might imagine, and this becomes the only record we might have. Normally we have the audio as well, so normally we can fix any notes from the audio recording. Please volunteer if you'd like to be the note taker for this session.
Okay, it looks as though we have Magnus volunteering.
Okay, I think we can assume Magnus will use the tool and move on. Would you like to cover the note well, Gory, or should I go ahead?
Well, this is the IETF Note well, so please note it well. The note well hasn't changed, but it still contains important information. If you wish to speak about a subject that includes IPR, then you need to adhere to the IPR disclosure as stated in the note well. This is a public meeting, it will be recorded. We need a note taker, we have one, it's Magnus Westerland. We could have a scribe from Jabba session, but we can also watch the notes. So this should be
Sorry,
okay.
your sound quality is horrible.
That's because. Is that all right now, Magnus?
No, it's
Nope.
it's not volume. It's really breaking up.
Sounds like some badly over amplification distortion or something, which
Which is really easy to fix. Yeah.
Mics by some chance, Gory?
Yeah. Where's take over?
David's rejoining and Gory's going to fix his audio, but I'll go ahead in the meantime. There's a brief reminder if you're going to submit any drafts and you want the working group to notice them, add the TSVWG to the ID title. And for Meet Echo today, use the hand icon to join the mic queue so we can see that you want to say something. If you can avoid it, please don't use the mic icon until we let you in. There are a lot of documents in the working group that we're trying to get input on and have reviewed. One good way to make sure that your documents get reviewed is to review other people's documents. So we always encourage people to do that. Some particular ones of interest right now are the ones on UDP options and DSCP related ones, which we'll talk about in a second. Since the last meeting, some things have happened. We haven't published any RFCs, but we did get one ID to the area director after the IETF last call. That's the 4960 biz document. And we're working on revising the SCTP NAT document in response to area director comments. There's a number of IDs that are very close to going to the area director. The two on Ecn encapsulation and Ecn for tunnels. These are very close and have been for a long time, but really need attention from Bob and David, I would say, to work through what needs to happen.
Yeah,
there.
L4S has been kind of preempting us. I think we need a paragraph or two of carefully crafted text for the first of them. As noted on the slide, the second draft is also is ready to go, but the first one is still causing headaches. And Bob and I have just been putting too many cycles into L4S, and my day job continues to get in the way of my IETF activity.
Okay. So hopefully those will be wrapped up soon. Then we had a working group last call on 3 of the L4S related documents, and there is some time on the agenda to discuss that and the updates to those documents later on. So aside from those, there are a number of other working group drafts that are in progress. There's the operational guidance on L4S, the NQB diffserv PHP draft, UDP options, datagram PLP MTUD for UDP options, which we have added to the charter and plan to finish up in parallel to the UDP options. There's TLS with SCTP updates, and there's been some discussion of the IPR disclosure related to that. There's a new draft on the diffserv default DSCP selection, which Martin has recently sent his comments on, and we adopted the multipath DCCP work. All right, so here's some changes to milestones. So the NQB PHB we plan to submit around the April timeframe, and both the transport options for UDP and the well, the acronym is messed up on this chart, but the datagram PLP MTUD for UDP options, those are both planned to go around the same time in May. We need to add milestones for some of the new work that's been brought in, which is multipath DCCP, DTLS, SCTP, and the draft on considerations for assigning new DSCPs.
Working group chairs will work with the authors offline and try to set up milestones that we might actually make. Our track record on initial milestone guesstimates is poor, but we'll make some guesstimates.
And the first 2 items on this chart are the Ecn drafts that we've been holding for a while that David will be working with Bob to try to get updated. And then there's still going to be a good amount of activity to be done here on the L4S drafts as we try to wrap up on those, figuring out how to proceed with some of the changes that the working group last call is calling for. And we have no liaison updates, but there are some liaison requests listed here. David or Gory, do you want to talk about any of those?
The WBA is all quiet in the WBA front. We sent the liaison response back over to them and have not heard anything since.
Okay.
On the tram working group, we will likely take over maintenance of that working group when the working group closes, as is normal for transport area groups. This brings back the behave and nut type activity to this working group here. Oh, and there's two other drafts which I'll just draw your attention to. One of these drafts has some slides at the end of the slide deck if you'd like to look. It's TCPLS, and there is discussion of ICCRG CCID 5. Use the mailing list. If you think it's appropriate, use ICCRG list, and we will discuss the suitable venue for this draft after this IETF meeting.
Okay, so for today, the agenda is summarized here. We're going to have Martin talk about code of conduct a bit. Then we have updates on what's going on with the L4S working group last call, the updates to the drafts, and the operational guidance. And if time should permit, Greg has some material on the NQB drafts. Then there's also a session on Friday, which covers everything else. So because we're sort of short on time, I want to try to get right to Martin's code of conduct charts.
Thank you. Do you have the slide?
Yep.
Good day, everyone. I just have the one slide. This isn't all that long, but these are just a few highlights from the code of conduct. The IEB and IESG have committed to make another effort to encourage the tone of conversations in the IETF for reasons that I think are probably obvious. There are some remedies in the code of conduct for people who aren't observing these these tenets, but for the time being, we're going to focus on, as maybe you might have observed on the list, we're going to focus on just sort of identifying behavior that we don't believe corresponds to the code of conduct, and calling it out and hopefully establishing norms that get us in a better place. I'm just going to ask you to do a couple things. Number one, I want to highlight the second bullet about limiting use of slang. I mean, I think many of us are kind of good friends and have online, have offline relationships, and we kind of joke around with each other and a little hard in a way that's sort of jocular. There's a lot of dry humor that I certainly appreciate. And there's, of course, there's slang, and it just I want, when we're up at the mic, I really want people to think about a newcomer who maybe doesn't have English as a first language, and what kind of message that says on how we receive ideas when, like when your friend gets and like kind of say, hey, this idea is garbage. You may have a good beer and laugh about that afterwards, but that kind of sets a bad tone for other people who might have ideas that they might think would be received harshly. And then finally, the other thing I would ask is, I think many of you, I think there are two ways to react to this effort and this stuff about the code of conduct. One is to think about all the ways in which you have been wronged, and many of you have been. But it'd be much more constructive to think about how maybe you have not lived your best self with respect to this. So I ask you all to use that constructive attitude towards it and not worry about the former. We can't really do anything of what's happened in the past. We're going to try to fix what happens in the future. So that's really all I had. Does anyone have any comments or questions? Bob.
Go ahead, Bob.
I just wanted to give a data point. I'm probably getting about as much email about L4S off list as on list, and a number of people say they don't want to talk on the list.
Yeah, I mean, you know, obviously
because of this
TSVW,
sort of problem, you know.
Yeah, I mean, like TSVWG obviously is a group where this has been a problem historically, specifically the L4S debate, and yeah, I mean, certainly, again, I don't want this to be about pointing fingers, but like there is certainly, we do not. This is not an environment that is conducive to newcomers and differing opinions coming out into the open. So it's one reason I wanted to personally get up in front of this group and talk about this. Any other comments? I don't see anyone else in the queue. If there's nothing else, I'm going to sign off and let the meeting continue. Thank you.
I think I'm talking about the working group last call status then on L4S. So we had a working group last call from late July through late August on the three main drafts, architecture, dual queue coupled, and the L4S ID. And notably, we did not include the L4S ops draft as part of the working group last call. That was all sort of according to plans that had been discussed earlier. This was a great working group last call in terms of the number of responses we got, which I know I've been working in the IETF for a long time and don't recall ever seeing that many responses to a working group last call in this working group. So that was really good. We got the full spectrum of possible responses that you could imagine. However, I would say there was very strong overall support for the L4S set of documents that were reviewed. In addition, there were several very well explained concerns about the documents moving forward at the moment. And so we're trying to work through those. And as the next steps from the working group last call, the editors have been making updates and responding to comments on the list. Some of them are similar to one another and or closely related. So sometimes the threads, I think, are a little bit hard to follow as they are in any IETF working group. But in this case, sometimes they're a little more complicated than others, it seems like. Amongst the chairs, we've gone through all of the messages that were received and done some tabulations and summaries and had some discussion. And there are a number of concerns that were raised that we're tracking. The three bullets I've listed here are the topmost ones that I think we agree are definitely needing work and most important to get agreements on before moving forward. So first of all, there were a couple of people who made comments about going forward with L4S versus and doing it at the experimental level like we've been planning. While 3168 sits out there as a standards track, and whether we should actually just be going straight to standards track and trying to obsolete 3168. The chairs didn't see that this is something the working group really has consensus on. At least it didn't seem like it yet. However, we thought there might be appetite to plan to do that in the future if the L4S experiment is looking successful. So we thought that before going forward with this, we should at least try to sketch what the working group thinks the long-term plans are that this is a part of, and that'll help the IESG understand why we're doing this as experimental now rather than standards track now, and and whether we plan to reevaluate that at some point. Then there are some comments that we received regarding RFC 4774, and basically the situation with regards to some of the recommendations in that document versus what we're doing with L4S at the moment was unclear. And Bob has been working hard to clarify that, and recently posted some updates that need to be discussed to figure out if people can understand and agree with what the plan is there. Jonathan, I see your hand is up. Why don't you go ahead?
So I saw those updates pop up about an hour ago, and a brief review suggests that L4S is described as conforming to RFC 4774 option 3. I believe that is inaccurate. And of course, we'll need to discuss that further.
Yeah, Jonathan, this is David. I've been looking at the notes. This is first text attempting to deal with them. It is going to be wide of the mark, as is typically the case. I believe what's intended here is it's close to option 3, but diverges in some aspects. If you look for the word compromise, you'll find the initial attempt to write those aspects up, which is not as clear as it could be. And there will need to be significant work discussion to make sure we've got this right. And in particular, we correctly describe the places in which it does not align with option 3.
No, I think the divergence is more serious than mere compromise. I think it is not option 3 at all.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna. I don't want to go split hairs on words. There is divergence. We get to sort it out in the list.
Yeah, I think we have time actually later in the agenda to talk about those changes more specifically.
But I mean, it is, Jonathan, it is as a foundation. I think it is clear to all concerned that L4S does not fully comply with option 3, which is peaceful coexistence. And I forget, I think it's peaceful coexistence or something like that with existing traffic, and the extent to which it does not, and whether that's a problem, are things that the working group gets to sort out in discussion. So your concern that compliance is claimed is noted based on having read the text. That's not where the final text is going to line up.
Right.
So thank you.
And yeah, finally, the third item I think that was a big one for us was there's a disagreement in the comments we received about the sort of results of risk analysis and how likely there are to be problems, and if the consequence is significant enough to motivate not going forward or not. So we have more of a challenge with that one, I think, because we're dealing with people's impressions and perceptions of how things are going to function and what the state of deployed base of the internet is and what will happen during the experiment. However, we think that the outside of what you might call the rough, it looks like the working group responses are accepting these risks and are informed of the data that has been brought forward about the potential problems. So we do want to make sure that that's the case and confirm that the working group is accepting the risks of L4S experimentation as it's been described. So there will have to be a little bit more discussion around that and confirmation through the mailing list. And there are a number of additional concerns that need more work. These were the big ones that we had agreed amongst the chairs that could drive interims if needed, but were most important to resolve. A number of them are, we're considering lesser criticality. For instance, there are a number about specifics of the dual queue construction, but since that is a sort of optional component of the L4S architecture, and there are alternatives to it, it's not something we think is blocking everything the way that these other big issues are. And that's all I have on the working group last call status.
Yeah,
Bob is going to present the updates to the drafts.
Okay, a little bit more on that last topic on dual queue. Dual queue is fundamentally dual PI2. There are certain decisions that have been made about the specific algorithms that are used that have specific consequences. There are other AQMs that could be designed. For example, a dual queue algorithm based on CODL, which would make different decisions with different consequences. The general view the chairs have of this is experimenting with AQM algorithms is fine, and as Wes said, dual queue is definitely not the only AQM you can use for L4S or other opportunities. And our view is that it doesn't have to be perfect as an AQM to experiment with for these reasons.
And for time, I'm going to switch to Bob's slides now. Go ahead, Bob.
Hi there. Can everyone hear me? At least can one person hear me?
Great.
Yep, good. Okay. The drafts have the draft numbers are there. There's a number of other people have helped with this, but they're the three main authors. If I move to the next, or if you could move to the next slide, please. Just to recap for anyone that doesn't know what L4S is, essentially it enables more high fidelity marking, more high fidelity congestion control, so that you don't have this compromise between either low queuing delay, low amplitude variation of queuing delay, or low utilization. So you can have tighter variation of the congestion control, and that gives you a more scalable and lower delay, and particularly lower delay at the tail of the latency, which is necessary for, or is desirable, shall we say, for more interactive communication, particularly with high bandwidth at the same time. So you can have both high bandwidth and low delay, and fully utilizing the capacity. Next. So just before we get on to the drafts, just a few other things that have been going on. Pete Heist's continuing testing and evaluation, and Jonathan's in a sort of red team characterization of that. It's worth going and have a look at that link there, look into all those tests. And I guess the main things that have been coming up recently are work on bursts from bursty links upstream of L4S and bursty flows. And I'll talk later about particularly the latter of those, but also, well, both of them actually. So these are really heads up. In fact, the whole presentation is heads up, because there's not really enough time to go into everything that's happening in detail. So the next one is that Tokay and Eric Dumazet have released a patch, and it's been applied to the release of Linux that's currently being merged in. for NetNext, which essentially takes an existing part of FQCODL that was designed for data centers with a low, shallow immediate threshold, and makes it so that it can only be set up so that it could only triggers for ECT1 packets, and ECT0 packets go past it to the deeper CODL machinery behind it. Toke's done that with a nice using the classification architecture. So with the traffic control command, you can set it up. So you can also use diffserv if you want as part of the classifier. But I've given the command there to give the ECT1 field as the classifier for that threshold, and then you've got L4S support in FQCODL, so people can test it, use it, try it out, all the rest of it. So please go and have a look at that. And actually, it also points there to section 527 of the RFC on FQCODL, which included that facility right when it was specified at the start, except for the ability to separate the ECN field into the 2 code points, which now Toke has enabled, and Eric previously. The other thing I want to give a heads up on is please go and have a look at Stuart's emails. I won't presume to summarize them, but it's important people read them, essentially about where Apple stands, or where Stuart stands on Apple's experiments with ECN. So that's well worth having a look at.
Do you want me to start working now, Bob?
I wonder whether shall we get to the end of the slides and see what the time's like?
Go ahead. Yep, go ahead, do that.
Yeah, thanks. Next slide then. So I've got 3 slides, one on each draft, and this is a summary. So as Wes said, there was a lot of response, and other than the sort of +1s and yes, I agree or don't agree or whatever, there was some substantial reviews, and shown here for each draft from each person. And I've added on the end, conversation that's been going on with the chairs, particularly about the text on 4774, and also the authors themselves have generated quite a bit of churn in the by noticing things in the drafts while we've been editing it all. So I would also say that probably the left-hand most reviews, particularly the left foremost, have done a really good pass through. A couple of them, all 3 documents, and 2 of the documents, and picked up a lot of things. So thank you very much, and thank you very much everyone who has contributed. One thing to explain there is the exclamation mark under Neil Cardwell. That is something Neil didn't actually review that document, but it was a passing comment on the TCPM mailing list where I said something about Linux's cubic response, and Neil said, hey, no, that's not right, and I'd got it from someone else, and that's what we'd been working on the basis of, and I'd never actually checked the code, and it wasn't right, and that meant some of the references we use where we did all the original maths and things in that the dual queue relies on were had errors in them. It turns out the errors didn't actually change anything in the code, because most of the code relied on the worst case to Reno, not cubic, but it just meant that we couldn't refer to all these papers we'd written all the cubic stuff in. So essentially I had to rewrite all that so that we could refer to it, and that's made Appendix C in the dual queue draft a lot longer, because I had to sort of recreate all that maths and in ASCII, and that caused a lot of work, which is one of the reasons why all the responses to everyone else's comments took so long to get started, because I wanted to make sure that we had the foundations there again, and it turned out the foundations hadn't actually changed. So apologies to everyone for not getting to respond. I mean, some people I responded fairly soon, but a lot of those responses have come in the last week or so and right over the last weekend. So, but I guess once you're in working group last call, you sort of get out of the IETF meeting cycles a bit, and for instance, you're allowed to post drafts even when the servers are closed and things like that. So please bear with us, and I'm sure the chairs will give some time for people to now look at the new text that has now appeared. And I can confirm that I believe all those reviews have been, or I've attempted to address all the points in all those reviews, some of which were considerably deep, involving quite large amounts of change. So thank you, everyone. And if you think yours hasn't been dealt with, your review of the documents, then that means I've missed it. I've also, because of the rush in the last few days, I normally give a summary of the diffs of each draft. I will do that on the mailing list, rather than having to rely on going and looking at the full text diffs, which don't tell you which are the important diffs compared to the unimportant editorial stuff, or less important. And apologies again for just-in-time posting. Now, the next, if you can move to the next 3 slides, or on the next slide, I'll go through each slide giving normative, technical, and editorial changes. And on the L4S architecture, there are no normative changes because it's not a normative document. In fact, it doesn't even have a section saying anything about must and should and what they mean. It doesn't refer to RFC 2119 about that sort of stuff. So it's gone through 4 deltas since July, the last IETF cycle. One of which was just a formatting change to move to the new version of the RFC XML. So I did that as a separate change so that it didn't pollute the diffs, and that's the case for all 3 drafts. I've said there are no technical changes in the L4S architecture. I mean, all the editorial stuff is pretty technical, but it's not changing the description of the technical stuff. It's clarifying it. So I would, there's no technical changes, but there was quite considerable rewriting of the descriptions of the technical stuff. So I won't go through all those sub bullets on editorial. You can see them there, read them in your own time. I'll just pick out a couple. There's some new thoughts on traffic, well, particularly on rate policing, just how that might, the interactions with rate policing. That's not rate policing for L4S, it's if L4S traffic hits a rate policer, what happens. Otherwise, let's move on. Next slide.
Interrupt a second and ask a question that came up in the chat. Moving back to this chart. Were you intending these check marks to represent the people whose comments you think are fully addressed and taken care of in the update, or is this the exhaustive list of comments you looked at?
This is the exhaustive list. It doesn't include comments that were I don't want L4S at all, and these are the reasons why, that I couldn't really do anything about in the drafts. These are reviews of the drafts, if you like.
Okay, well, I think some of those comments can't be discarded in that way. And
No, I don't intend to discard them, but I mean, say for instance, Jonathan's, I was going to go on the list now. I needed to get the draft sorted. I was going to go on the list and talk about those points, but I could, the attempts we're doing to talk about the deficiencies and things in the drafts, I think we'll address those things, but it's difficult to tie them to a particular thing we're doing in the drafts because they're sort
Okay.
of
Fair enough.
off
Could
in
you
another
make
direction.
a list? Could you make a list somewhere for just process record of the people whose comments you've seen but fall into the category, fall into roughly that category of not seeing specific draft updates?
Yeah, I mean, it's
nonetheless,
primarily Jonathan and then other people who said, I agree with Jonathan. So
okay, but
yeah.
If you could send a note to the list that basically summarizes the peoples whose names aren't on this slide because of what you've just gone through, we would at least acknowledge that as part of the process, those comments are there, and we'll are in need of being dealt with.
I mean, for instance, Pete Heist's.
No. This is the process. This is the process.
Yeah, I know. Let me just say this. Pete Heist gave pointers to all his experiments, and then he reviewed the 3 drafts. And at the moment, I've only dealt with drafts, but I've still got someone of the proponents has got to deal with talking about each of the points he's raised. Obviously, a lot of them have come up in talking about the points he's made reviewing the drafts, but just for a process point of view, yes, we need to pick up each point.
Right, and from a process point of view, I'm asking you simply a summary that lists off people whose names aren't on this slide, but nonetheless have made comments that that will need to be dealt with.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Right. So if you move forward again, right. So I guess here is a different characterization with a lot more normative bullets and less other. Actually, the first 2 sub-bullets of normative haven't yet involved any change, but I'll go through all 4. And I've got a spare slide on the last 2 sub-bullets of normative if we need it. So firstly, on the Prague requirements, particularly on the one about detecting classic Ecn AQMs, amazingly didn't have any comments except for Jake. So in fact, all through, since we've written all that, no one has commented on that normative text in section 4.3 except for Jake. And Jake tried to improve it. I've responded to Jake. You probably had no time to process it because it was yesterday. I think it feels like hours ago, but I think it was yesterday. And so there's likely to be some more conversation on that. But I think Jake's suggestions ended up making it more lax, not more strict. And so I haven't changed it yet. The characterization of it would be that the text in the draft is conditioned on problems, and Jake was trying to condition it on the sender's what the sender does on whether it's an FQ or a dual Q, but we deliberately didn't want to do that because the sender doesn't know for sure what it is. So we tried to condition it on problems, in quotes, detecting problems. So anyway, there's likely to be more on that. Sorry, someone trying to speak?
Jake?
Sure. Thanks, Wes. I did send a response actually after this meeting started, so you probably haven't read it yet. I guess the point I was trying to get at is, which I said in the email, maybe you could just read it. I don't think we have to beat it to death here. It's really just conditioning on problems without requiring attempts to detect the problems is where I'm a little bit stuck. And so I think I agree that we'll have to hammer that out a little more. But it seems likely something can be done. Bye.
Okay, cool. Yep. There's a huge lump of new a subsection of the about that particular bullet about classic Ecn AQM detection, none of it is normative in itself, but it essentially it says what the RFCs say. It says what or it intends to say what L4S does and doesn't comply with in those RFCs, and gives a justification for what it doesn't comply with, and some context. So that's certainly that's what David and Wes have just been talking about, and that certainly has only just appeared for people, so that will require some bashing, I'm sure. It has already had some bashing from the chair's off list, but we'll see. And to a certain extent, that bashing had to stop for the meeting, and hadn't necessarily. And I'm not saying that the chairs approved the text that's there, although it did get better from what they did. The next two, they're fairly sort of tinkering type things, and it may be best actually to deal with them with the spare slide. How are we doing for time, Wes?
For this topic?
Yeah.
Martin just said there's 5 minutes to go.
Okay, right. Okay, that's fine then. Let's jump to the final slide, final spare slide then for those last two bullets. Keep going. No, the spare slide, right at the end. Right. So here, there are three areas where normative text. It's difficult to say whether it's changed. It's the subject of the text of the normative statement has changed to correct it, but just these aren't actual diffs. They're just sort of paraphrased diffs, if you like. This is the actual text now, and the emboldening is just the main changes. Otherwise, it gets really difficult to parse. So the first one is in a section on if a node that's doing classification on the ECN field is also or wants to be transport aware or is willing, has transport awareness capabilities, and just that text has been in there right from the start, and haven't really looked at it for years, and it said that it treats a CE packet the same as the most recent ECT packet. And when I looked at that, I thought, you know, with the more recent considerations of VPNs, I thought, oh God, if there's a VPN that's going to you know, be switching about all the time. So we've made it that it should only consider CE as ECT0 if all the previous packets have been ECT0. That obviously has connotations when you've got transient flow state as to what all means. So there may be some bashing to do on that text. The other two, they were both about where it said the operator did something, and it actually then implied that the operator across their whole network did it rather than an L4S node. So that first one, we made it the process of it including additional traffic rather than the operator. So it didn't really change the sense of the mandatory statement, but it changed the subject of it. And the last one, both Pete Heist and Stuart picked this one up, and I'm still not sure whether it's right or even necessary, so maybe we can take that discussion to the list. But it's essentially if an L4S is about excluding certain machines that are trying to, you know, wanting to use L4S from being able to, you know, as a sort of commercial or security thing. There's some exceptions in the draft that allow operators to do that, and it's about whether they should then treat ECT1 as ECT0 or not. And I don't know whether we need to say that must not. It was designed to not add further confusion as more L4S nodes are put in, but yeah, there's a debate to be had on that one. So if we can go back to the dual queue So that, sorry, to the L4S ID slide, just to finish it off. One more back.
Bob, if we want to have any time for comments, we have to start that soon. As we're taking time from the ops draft now.
Yep. Okay. So just move to heads up then, rather than explaining things. There was new technical text put in about limiting packet bursts, both from upstream links, well, particularly from upstream links, but also added some open questions on bursty traffic, and had some conversation on the list about that, and trying to do more work on that. And next slide, the editorial, we can jump. I've explained the stuff that got put into the dual queue, which is the fourth sub-bullet there about choosing the coupling factor and RTT independence, and all the maths there. And again, that's where the stuff on potentially bursty traffic, or the bursty traffic and the potential problem and potential solution is in Appendix A. There's been some discussion on the parameters in the Pi2 parameters paper that's been updated, and that's sorry, I'm working backwards up the bullets, sorry about this. And there's also been an improved explanation of the need for the conditional scheduler based on Gori's review. So that's all the drafts that, please go and look at all those points. Just finally next steps, and then we're done. So as Wes said, likely to be follow-ups in the next few days and weeks, maybe. And then I don't know what's going to happen. That's up to the chairs. And those things expected to happen in parallel were on the slides from last time as well. They're the technical work that will continue on, I'm sure. Thank you. Any discussion and comments?
Do we have time?
From the outset, I think. Go ahead.
Thank you for that presentation, Bob. You mentioned my name on one of the slides and said you wouldn't presume to try to sum up what I said, which I understand is an awfully long email. It took me a while thinking about it. I'll try to give a summary now of my main points there. In recent years on the internet, there's been lots of work increasing bandwidth that's been enormously successful, going from dial-up to megabits to gigabits. But working latency under load has not improved. And my real worry is we should not become complacent. We, this community, should not casually assume that the internet will continue to exist. We know there are various communities around the world working on creating a replacement for the internet. And you can see all their web pages saying how great they are, which incidentally run over our internet, but leave that aside. The people working on X25 in America Online probably thought that those would continue to exist too. Technologies do get overtaken. So we've been trying at Apple to raise awareness of the importance of latency, not just more bandwidth. And some of you may have seen the network responsiveness tester that's now included in macOS and iOS to try to bring awareness to users that it's not just about how many megabits you have that controls your experience. So we're trying to do our bit there, raising awareness. And what I'm looking for from this working group is guidance. As one of Apple's senior engineers, what should I be advocating within Apple that we should do to help the internet meet future needs better? And the answer is not just more bandwidth. One of my conclusions I've come to thinking about this is I am not too concerned about worrying about backwards compatibility with classic ECN. RFC 3168 was written 20 years ago. It, practically speaking, isn't deployed. It failed. So I get very worried when people are talking about 3168 and 4774 as if our hands now are tied by failed ideas from 15 years ago. I want us to fix this problem because my fear is that if we don't, somebody else is going to fix it, and the internet will go the way of X25. That's it.
Go ahead.
All right, so I would dispute Stuart's characterization as of RFC 3168 style ECN as having failed. I think there is actually quite a lot of deployment of ECN compatible nodes in the internet, but not so much deployment of endpoints that actually use it. So I think that would be the place to focus. I had been planning to make a more detailed response to his comment.
Sorry to interrupt, Jonathan, can you clarify what you mean by nodes and endpoints?
Okay, so
every
nodes.
iPhone in the world uses ECN. That's 1 billion devices. We have found basically no networking equipment run by any operator ever marks the packets. That's what I meant by it's a failure. We've for 5 years we've had ECN turned on every iPhone, and Linux has it turned on as well, and we see no CE marking in the network ever.
So I was about to get to that point. I was going to do a more detailed response to your comments by email. But I want to touch on what you said about heuristics, about when to use ECN and when to turn it off. And I think that those heuristics are giving you a misleading picture here. So I'll leave it at that for now and continue on email.
I think we have to decide, Jake, you have a comment, and then I think we have to decide whether we have time to do anything useful with L4S ops today. But Jake, go ahead.
Yeah, just to respond to Stuart's point, I do think there's good evidence that there are tens of millions of devices deployed. They don't mark very frequently, but the problem here is that as we get into their deployment and their presence there causes trouble for other traffic marked or not. You know, it's the backward incompatibility in the signaling here. I guess we've hashed this out a bunch, but yeah, while I would not disagree with the characterization that it's failed, you know, it doesn't help that much, and it's a pretty expensive location, but that doesn't mean that there's no deployment and that we don't have to worry about it. And this is yeah, this is the core of the problem to me, but I guess we can discuss it more on this. Thanks.
Can you do a real quick fly through the summary of L4S ops, and perhaps we can assign some discussion time for it in the next session?
Hi. Hi, David, and everyone. Yeah, this slide deck is just effectively a diff of you know, the edits that have been made in the draft since the last published version. So I think I can do it in a minute, and then people can look offline and see if they have comments to take to the list. So if you want to go to the next slide, Wes. Yeah, I won't talk about this one. Actually, go on to the next one. The outline, the only thing that's changed in the outline is the title of section 6.2, non-preferred options, used to be less preferred options, and that's details on that are in the upcoming slides. On to the next one. This is the summary I sent to the mailing list verbatim. And I have in this deck a slide for each one of these that goes into a little bit more detail about what the changes were. So that's the next 8 slides then. And I think you can just at this point flip through those for just so folks know what's in the deck. And again, we can take discussion to the list, I think, on this one. Yep, go ahead and flip through. And then the last slide, yeah, next steps. This is not ready for working group last call yet, I don't think. The intention was not to try to get this ready for working group last call for this meeting. A lot of these changes were made just ahead of the deadline for draft for this meeting. So please review. And if you have suggestions for further enhancements or improvements to the text, please send those to the list. All right, that's it.
Running out of time for you too, Greg, today, but hopefully we can use some time at the beginning of the next meeting if there are comments on this doc that need meeting time. Otherwise, yeah, the list is our best approach. Gory, anything final to say?
Yeah, I would just like to say that we have quite a lot of things coming up in the next meeting which are not related to L4S. So have a look at those drafts and please use the list to pass comments.
All right, very good. And I see we're a couple of minutes over time now, so I think we have to adjourn.
Thank you.